Matt Lenihan Boxing Social in association with Empire Fight Star and R Kings. We're here in Las Vegas, and as always, we've got Dan Rafael back on. Also, make sure you subscribe to his newsletter, Fight Freaks Unite. There'll be a link in our description. It'll also be on the socials. Make sure you tap in there, all fight fans. Dan, before we talk the fight, how are we, mate?
I'm great. It's great to see you. I mean, we've been talking before on the screen, but I haven't seen you in person in a while, so good to see you.
Last time we spoke in person, I think, was Canelo Munguia, and we chopped it up. It's a while back, but...
May of last year. May of last year, right?
May of last year, but you know what? We're back, and I'm so happy to be in this city. I'm just finishing my second week now. We did the Pacheco fight. I'm on a world tour, and it ends tomorrow night. I'm looking forward to going home, but... Look, we've got to talk about this fight. We briefly touched on it in our Zoom interview, but Benavidez, Morrell, as it's getting closer, the excitement's building. I think this is such a good fight. Both taking this in the primes of their careers. Morrell obviously coming from that Cuban stock, that amateur background. Benavidez, who's got a terrific professional record. This is such a good fight for boxing.
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, you don't have to, try to kiss anybody's rear end and make it out to be better than it is, where they try to maybe make certain fights look better than they really are. So I think anybody that has followed any of these, recent pay-per-views or looked at these type of guys, previous fights or what they've done and the styles that they fight in, and I mean this, if you had said to boxing fans before this fight was actually signed and announced, to maybe like say 6 months ago, hey, go make a list of like the top, 10 or 12 fights in the sport that you would like to see in 2025 or thereabouts. I would dare say a lot of people would put David Benavidez against David Morrell on that list. No question about it. Very, very good, strong matchup. Been a spicy kind of build-up. And as you mentioned, primes of their careers, make fun fights, don't really seem to like each other. So their skills, they both can crack. They're still the unknown because they're not really that familiar so much with the light heavyweight division. And it's a great fight on its own, but of course there's a lot of opportunity for the winner to maybe move on to fight for undisputed. So it's checks all the boxes with a good undercard to boot.
Yeah, the build-up's been spicy as well. I mean, when you look at the press conference, we had Louis de Cubas going at Benavidez. I thought was hilarious. And the only change in demeanour was from Morrell. Morrell was throwing the belt in the build-up. He's approached this week and he's been very sort of zen-like, very calm. He's not wanted to engage, whereas Benavidez has been the polar opposite, calling him every name under the sun. What do you make of that? It's exciting for us, obviously, but it's the mind games going into it. It's the temperaments of these fighters. What have you made of both of these guys and how they've approached fight week?
Well, David understands how to sell a fight. He said as much in an interview with me. He said it to other people. So I asked him at one point, is the animosity, is it for real or is it for show because you're trying to build up a fight, or you guys are just getting pumped because you got to fight each other? He's like, it's a little bit of both. And then he made a point, that's my fourth pay-per-view fight, and that sells and it's exciting, but I still don't like the guy. So yeah, it's real, but maybe it's a little bit more over the top because he is trying to sell the fight. And in terms of David Morrell's situation, I think that he also probably has an element of animosity, but he has never been in this spotlight like this before against an A-level opponent trying to sell a pay-per-view. So I think he's sort of not been as loud and all that because he's sort of getting a feel for what it's like to be involved in a big event. Plus, there's also a little bit of a language barrier, so he's had to say a lot of it in Spanish, not so much in English, which is fine. But look, the bottom line is they both look in great shape at the weigh-in. They're both ready to throw hands, no doubt about it.
I was going to say, you mentioned there in terms of the big fight experience, obviously plays into the hands of Benavidez. Do you see that potentially being a key factor in this fight?
I have no doubt in my mind that's a factor because as excellent as David Morrell is in terms of his background in the amateur ranks, he has yet to fight a legitimate top fighter as a professional. And I'm not knocking him for that. It's not like he's been ducking guys, just hasn't been given the opportunity. And he's gotten to himself to 11-0, 9 knockouts. He's won, second-tier type titles, but he has not faced the really, truly top guys. Benavidez has got way more professional fights, and he has fought a number of very reputable, quality fighters. You don't go through Caleb Plant, before that Anthony Durrell, Demetrius Andrade, even Alexander Vodzik, who may have been, a little bit, had been off for a while, retired, come back, won a few fights. But again, he was a former world champion, a great amateur fighter. Like, he's beating real, solid, legitimate championship level fighters, back to back to back to back. I mean, David Benavidez has not had what you would say, like, quote unquote, easy fight, for a few years now. And now he's stepping up to fight David Morrell. I don't think that's a dramatic difference in the level of guys he's fought over the last 3 or 4 fights. So yeah, the experience level, he's lived that. He's been through that. And I don't know if Morrell understands what he's about to get into. You know what I mean?
I think that's what's exciting. There's so many variables. And also, every good fighter has his first opportunity. So we have to remember that. This could be Morrell's coming out party. Even though everyone knows he's a good fighter, he may shine under the lights. It sometimes brings out that extra gear for fighters. But I look at this, and when I speak about this fight, a lot of people say, you know what, this is a terrific fight. And then they say, we really obviously want the Canelo fight. And because of the talk of the Crawford fight, obviously, if Benavidez is to win, there's almost this feeling now that fight has gone. Do you think that? Do you think that fight is still going to be ever on the table, no matter if Canelo fights Crawford, or do you think it'd ever happen?
I don't think you can say it's never going to happen, but it's definitely in the rearview mirror for the time being. Because if, in fact, Canelo goes forward, he'll fight in May. Perhaps they'll finalize the fight against Crawford for the fall. In the meantime, if Benavidez is the victor on Saturday night against Morrell, he knows and he's talked about it, and it'd be the same case for Morrell if he were to win, but they are now in the mandatory position in two organizations for the winner of the undisputed fight between the rematch between Arthur Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol on February 22nd. And if you listen to the things that Turki Al-Sheikh has said, who obviously is putting up the money to put on that great show on February 22nd, he has made it a point to tell podcasts and interviews and social media and this and that how much he would like to get David Benavidez involved in one of these big-time fights. He's a fan. So, of course, I think that's a possible fight between the financial wherewithal that he has, the fact that it will be mandatory in two organizations, the fact that it would still, in the light heavyweight division, probably represent the biggest money that either Beterbiev or Bivol could make. The only exception would be that if Bivol were to be the winner, perhaps there might be the looking at a second fight with Canelo, which is the one fight that Canelo has said he wants and would be interested to do in the light heavyweight division. But yeah, Benavidez could be involved in that, and maybe Morrell to a lesser extent. We'll see. But the point is, the matchup between Morrell and Benavidez on its own is a fantastic fight. And it's for stakes. I mean, whatever you think about the second-tier titles. But I've looked at it more like the guy who wins is going to be by public acclamation. I call them the people's mandatory, whatever the organizations say. So that's stakes right there. But it also has a chance to lead to some even more significant, bigger money, bigger exposure, which would be the winner of the undisputed fight, the fight for undisputed. That's what David Benavidez and David Morrell want, is that opportunity.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And look, I think whatever happens, there's so many different fights, like a bit of a merry-go-round you could have there. It all looks good for that. I want to ask you about last week. So we saw Diego Pacheco go against, I would call it a very brave Steven Nelson. Look, he took a lot of punishment, I feel, in there, but he kept going to the end. He kept trying. He never sort of threw the towel in, and he kept going. But Diego Pacheco proved too much. And saw Andy Cruz on the card and pick up another victory. Him and Keyshawn, that rivalry sort of marinating nicely. What did you make of Pacheco, first of all?
Well, I've been a big Pacheco supporter in the first place. Back at the end of 2023, I picked him as my prospect of the year. As I like to say, he's making me look good so far. But, I wasn't surprised that he beat Steven Nelson whatsoever. To be honest, and I have all respect for the effort that Steven Nelson put into it and the type of heart that he showed, and I have nothing but respect for Steven Nelson's, what he did in that fight. And I'd seen Steven Nelson fight numerous times in the past. But when the fight was made, I felt like it was going to be an easy win for Pacheco, so I wasn't surprised at all. Steven Nelson put up a great fight. The cut obviously took him out of the game a little bit in round 4 or 5. Yeah. But Pacheco, a little bit of a slow start, but he's kind of been like that if you watch most of his fights. So I wasn't really surprised, and he just finds a way to get the job done. I thought that Steven Nelson was probably, if you take a look at the limited experience against the type of guys he's been fighting that Pacheco has, I feel like Nelson was probably the best opponent he faced, except maybe Selesky. But the difference with Selesky is Selesky was really more of a natural fighter in the smaller weight classes, whereas Steven Nelson is pretty solid in this weight class. So you can make the argument maybe he was the best or second best. Anyway, he did a good job. He did what he was supposed to do. He got in some valuable rounds, and there was not like a question that he won the fight. Some people get a little too freaked out if you're like a huge supporter of that particular fighter. Okay, so fine. The fight was maybe 2-2 after 4 rounds. Well, then from round 5 to through round 10, Pacheco definitely won every single round. And then, 11 and 12, or maybe it could have gone either way, I suppose. But no doubt Pacheco did the job.
Yeah, no doubt who won that fight. I think just a valiant effort from obviously Steven Nelson. But yeah, there's no doubt who won the fight. It was a good performance. I want to talk to you a little bit about Andy Cruz. So I spoke to Andy a few times during fight week. Even though the lack of English, the way it comes through on translation, he's a very comical guy, keeps referring to Keyshawn Davis as his son. And then they have this interaction ringside where he almost looks at Keyshawn to say, look, the respect's there, and Keyshawn's sort of like, yeah, whatever, taps his hand away. What do you make of Andy Cruz? First, the performance and this rivalry from the amateurs. It's really it's building nicely, hopefully to a huge crescendo at some point.
I mean, sometime. I mean, it would make sense. I mean, Keyshawn right now he's a lot more advanced professionally than Andy is. Andy is older than him, and obviously he had that same humongous amateur background. And actually, in terms of his accomplishments, was much more decorated than Keyshawn Davis. I mean, Keyshawn did get the medal in the Olympics, but of course he lost to Andy Cruz, and I think he fought like 5 times as amateurs, and he wasn't able to beat him. But as a professional, Keyshawn is now a bona fide contender. He's fighting for the world title against Baranchyk in just a couple of weeks from now, and that separates them to a degree. Andy, I like Andy as a pro, but my one quarrel with what Andy, I was actually talking to his manager Alex in this media center here yesterday. He's not busy enough. You can't expect. I know he's got a great amateur career, but amateur boxing is different than professional boxing. Okay, just to flat out ask Lomachenko what it was like in his first couple of fights coming into the pros. There's an adjustment period, and Andy is a tremendous athlete and an excellent boxer. But you have to get the reps. You have to get the experience. He's just not getting that. For him to be a pro already for over 2 years and only have had 5 fights is ridiculous. So he's not ready for Keyshawn as a professional yet. I know Keyshawn's only got 12 fights, but he's been active while he's been a pro. And he's fighting regular, and he's now fighting for a world title. And I'm sure when he wins that, if he wins that fight, there'll be defenses that he's not going to step back, and he's going to stay active, 2-3 times a year, which is unfortunately what qualifies as active in today's day and age. But Andy, you got to fight more before you can. I mean, yeah, I get that there's going to be maybe a fight between those two guys down the road, but that's a long way away at this point because he's fighting a certain level, and Keyshawn's stepping up to fight the guys in the major guys in the division. So
when I speak to Keyshawn, and I said this to him yesterday, I said, I get the feeling that sometimes when people talk about an Andy Cruz, you feel almost like either overlooked or disrespected because he referenced the fact that, look, when I was 5-0, nobody was fast-tracking me to fight for the guy or a rival who was fighting for a world title. He says, but you're giving this guy, everyone's giving this guy that kind of pass. And look, I get it's the rivalry. You don't want to hype up the guy who's maybe beat you in the amateurs. But he's very much like, this is all about me picking up belts. And he said it on interviews when I sat poking about, a Tank fight and all these other guys. He's like, look, if they've got a belt, we can go. I'm about picking up these belts. And his mindset seems to have shifted from a few years ago. I feel like, although he's quite wild, and he's like, yesterday he was putting it on all the media. He was skipping and asking all the media questions. It went the other way around. He was like, how many are you going to be at my fight? Skip, skip, skip. How many of you thought I'd stop Lemos? And he was almost like, goading everybody into trying to give him answers that he wanted. And what do you think of Keyshawn? I feel like he's really maturing.
Oh, there's no question. I think Keyshawn is tremendous. He gets it. He's a great promoter of his events. He's great with the press. And this is a very significant thing. If you remember back, I forget how long ago, it was a year or so ago, he had that situation where he won the fight, didn't look particularly great, had a failed marijuana test after the fight, got suspended for 6 months, got a fine. They changed the win to a no contest against just a regular kind of opponent. And he said after that he was gonna, he was like beating his chest. Well, I'm still gonna smoke weed. You can't stop me. Blah blah blah. And my perspective was, look, if you want to smoke weed and it's legal, you go ahead and do it. But if you're gonna be a professional athlete and a boxer, and you fight in a commission where it's against the rules, where in virtually every commission, at least in the United States, it's still against the rules. So you're taking your career into your hands if you want to be a stupid person and go and smoke weed and get caught because you're just going to do damage to your own career. It's not my problem if you get caught. And I feel like he finally, at some point, he realized that he needed to stop doing that. Not, for a lot of different reasons, to be a better athlete, but also not to make sure he didn't get in trouble with the commission. Anyway, the point I'm making is that when that fight happened, he took the suspension. When he came back, I believe he's had 3 fights since then. He has looked spectacular. And he says he's clean, and it feels like in his performances that he's telling the truth because he's looked at another level in the recent fights, especially against Lemos, but even against the Mexican fighter Medueno looked really good. So I feel like that's been a very positive change, that the combination of the experience he's gaining, I think taking it more serious because he's not smoking weed anymore, that we're seeing the real Keyshawn. That in the earlier fights, he's fighting lesser guys, but he's sort of getting by because he's just a better athlete and just more experienced. Now as he's stepping in to fight more experienced, better fighters, it's the combination of, yes, he's got the talent, but now his mind is clear and is better able to train, and not tired, and just all the things that go into what happens when you smoke weed. I'm not saying if you want to, if you're a professional boxer, it doesn't help you. It hinders you, you know. So I think he's turned the corner, and I think we're going to see. Honestly, I think we'll see a big performance against Baranchyk for him.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that fight. I think stylistically, from the outside looking, I think it suits Keyshawn, that kind of fight. But look, we'll see. He's still young, and it could be a big test, but we'll see on the night.
I was going to say, in terms of like you were talking about Andy Cruz, like he doesn't want to bother with Andy unless he's got a belt. I feel like if Keyshawn wins the title against Baranchyk and Andy is still 5-0, doing what he's doing and fighting, every 6, 7, 8 months, that the onus is going to be on Andy Cruz to get him to fight him. Just because he beat him in the amateurs doesn't mean shit in the pros. You know what I mean? I mean, it does from the standpoint like they know what happened when they fought each other. But I'm talking about in terms of the business, the economics, like why he would want to fight you to do that, other than maybe the wanting to get revenge. But when you're a world champion, you're like, I don't need to fight that guy. I got a world title. So Andy got to do something to make it make sense for everybody involved. And right now, I feel like he's got the chance to do that, but he's far away from actually making it happen.
Well, hopefully an active year for him, an active couple of years, because Keyshawn, if he picks up this title, I'm sure we'll look at other opportunities, and hopefully they meet down the line, but we'll see. There's big fights for them both. Last one, just before I go. Keyshawn did reference in his media thing, he said, guys, he says, if I fight Tank, does that put any credibility on Tank's resume? He says, what does that do for him? Does that help him or hinder him? And he's kind of asking the question, does that? And he says, and everyone was like, yeah, we'd love to see that fight. Could you imagine a Keyshawn and a Tank together? That would be one hell of a build-up as well.
No doubt about it. I mean, obviously, if it were to happen, it would be of interest to. It should be of interest to both fighters because it would be a unification fight, based on the fact that Keyshawn would have defeated Baranchyk. So I don't know any fighters in all the years I've done this that don't like the idea of trying to fight the other champions. Now, Tank hasn't done that yet. I wish he would. He can get any fight he wants. He's the A side for most of these fights, probably all of the fights in the weight class. So why wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, maybe we'll hear a little more from Tank as his fight with Lamont Roach approaches, of what his sort of mentality was. Now, I understand that at the moment that he was preparing to fight, that those guys weren't necessarily available. Yeah. They did try to do the Lomachenko fight, which in his defense would have been a unification. Now, Loma tried to fight him years ago, and it wasn't Tank that said it, was Floyd Mayweather, who was promoting him at the time, that basically said to the media, we're not fighting him. But then Loma decided he wanted to take the rest of the year off, which is his right to do. And I think they were looking maybe to get Loma at the later stages of a career to get the name on the record. But he did look to show interest to try to unify. They had a deal, close to being made, and then they stopped negotiating because Loma said, I'm done for the rest of the year. So that opportunity for unification escaped him. But I would think that if Keyshawn wins, you got to probably give him a couple of fights to build his name up a little bit to make it the biggest that it can be. I don't know why Tank wouldn't do that fight.
Look, I think there's so many good fights out there, and that's just one of them. Dan, appreciate you jumping on. Hell of a fight tomorrow. Honestly, if you're in Las Vegas and there's tickets left, try get them. It's going to be incredible, live on Prime Video. Dan, appreciate it as always. Make sure you subscribe. Fight Freaks Unite, the newsletter, description. The link will be in the description and on socials for Boxing Social, and we will catch up soon.
Thank you, Matt. I look forward to it. Appreciate it.